All right, hello and welcome to anybody who's joined us. I'm just getting our going live on YouTube right now, so if you just bear with me for 1 second. There you go. All right, that's perfect. Welcome to another sales chat, and I am delighted to be welcoming Roy Osing, who's up in Canada, right, Roy?
Up in beautiful Vancouver.
Beautiful Vancouver, Canada, absolutely. And Roy is, he's a long career in sales and executive leadership, and he's also the author of the Be Quick or Be Dead series. Great series that you can find on Sales Pop. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM. I'm also joined by my colleague Martha, who is in Vienna, Austria. How are you doing, Martha?
Hi, thanks. I'm doing fine.
Excellent. And Martha is going to be looking after the Twitter chat, right? So if you are on Twitter, hashtag SalesChats, okay? SalesChats, that's plural. And get involved in the conversation. Let us know what you think. Answer the questions. You may have better insights than, you probably have better insights than me. Maybe not better than Roy, but we'll see. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is sales as a science. Right, high-performing sales culture. So, okay, Roy, let's just jump into this, right? Number one, what is a sales culture, and why is a sales culture even important?
Yeah, excellent question. And I guess the first thing I would say is that I look at culture as being that thing that actually creates the right conditions for performance. I mean, different cultures will create different levels of importance. So it's really important to look at what kind of sales culture an organization wants. You can't look at it in isolation. So there's no such thing as a right one and a wrong one. There's a relevant one and there's an irrelevant one, depending on what you want to shoot. So what I do is I always look at the context. What is the right context for creating a sales culture? For me, that context is, what's the purpose of sales? Seems like a pretty simple question, but it typically ends up with answering a whole bunch of different ways. The way I look at sales is the sales imperative is to actually grow the business. So if you boil it down to one word, sales is here to grow, right? And typically that's what organizations expect it to do. Yeah. The real question is, what's the best way to do that? And this is where the cultural piece comes in, right? Because there's many ways of doing it. Culture for me addresses how we're going to achieve the growth imperative, because there's a number of different choices we can make, right? It's really important that you make the right choice here. My bias has always been, and for those of you that have read articles that I've written for you, this will be no surprise. My choice for the right culture to satisfy growth is the good old relationship building piece, okay? I believe it's the right way to grow sales in the long run. And that is to develop deep relationships with them. The real key thing here, John, is that the focus is on enticing people to buy, not selling things to them. Big difference. And so if you start thinking about a culture that's built around enticing people to buy versus selling things at them, I mean, you can imagine there's a significant difference between those two cultures. So my emphasis is on looking for ways of trying to get people to buy. And that involves different things. It involves trust, it involves integrity, etc. Selling, I can boil down to, are you using the sales tools that you got in front of you proficiently, right? And so for me, the right sales culture to look at creating is built around relationships, because I think it satisfies the growth imperative of the business more effectively than anything else. One other piece, you can't stop at saying, I want a relationship building culture, right? You got to go to the next piece that says, okay, what are the specific sales behaviors that I want to have created in order to actually perform to that culture? And that's what we get down to a conversation around what I call sales values. So values describe behaviors, okay, that in fact yield the culture that you want. So the high performance sales cultural process, if you want, starts out with, what's the purpose of sales? And we better be clear on what that is. And every team may have a different way of looking at it, to be honest, and that's fine. Secondly, what's the definition of culture that you want? In other words, what is your cultural intent? Huge piece of work. The third piece says basically takes that, degenerates it, breaks it down into what I call sales values. And what you want to do is you want to look at, I don't know, 3 or 4 key ones. You don't want to brainstorm this. You don't want to have 25 values, because guess what happens, right? Nobody pays attention, it loses focus, and nothing gets done.
Exactly. And I think an important point here, Roy, is, let's face it, in a lot of organizations, and not just in sales organizations, in companies, right? Culture is something that people just let evolve, right? Just let it just organically happen. And unfortunately, when you do that, it rarely turns out the way you would really want it to be, because when you let culture develop organically, it will often kind of settle at the lowest common denominator. So I think what you're saying here is that you have to be deliberate in everything you do. And in sales, in the past, people have been a little bit more, sales is more free flow, but the reality is, the top performing organizations and sales teams are very, very well thought out, well managed and disciplined, right?
See, I would argue that you do not want a sales culture. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is I would like a culture that's built around client buying, not people selling, because it means completely different things. Now, you have to have confidence, right, that relationship building will lead to money. And I have to tell you, I've run a lot of sales organizations in my time, and guess what? I never missed my numbers. Mm-hmm. And I never flogged products. It was always about relationships. And the interesting thing to me is the funnel wasn't based on the number of closings to come up. It was based on the number of customers wanting to talk to us because they trusted us. They wanted to give us their money. How cool is that?
But let me ask you, Roy, right? In your career, right, you say you never missed a number and you built relationships, right? But it wasn't building relationships for the sake of building relationships, was it? I mean, it wasn't like these people who go, oh, well, I'm getting on really well with this person. They really like me. And you go, well, that's fantastic, but I ain't bought anything from you.
No, don't misunderstand me. Okay, I'm very results oriented. And when I was given a 25% revenue increase bogey, which wasn't atypical, particularly when the data and internet business was picking up. It was all about targeting clients and creating the right relationships with those that would yield the maximum money. I mean, look at what I wanted to do is to get the whole amount of my revenue out of one client. Okay, that seemed a bit ridiculous. Well, how about 2? Okay, how about 3? In other words, minimize the amount of effort and maximize the amount of return. And I was able to do that by relationships, not flogging products. In fact, I mean, there was a lot of salespeople in my organization that self-selected themselves out because what they wanted to do was practice sales techniques, and that's not what I want.
Yeah. So how can you tell if you're in the early stages of doing this and you're trying to develop a deliberate culture and all of that? What are some of the leading indicators that you can look at to say, okay, this is starting to have an impact. People are starting to do the right things.
Okay, so just going back to the process, right, which is purpose, cultural intent, and values. The work needs to be done around values. Okay, you can't just, to your point, cultures don't evolve; they're created. Dysfunction evolves.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what happens. Good. So let's talk about creating the right culture. And it really is all about values. Once you get your cultural intent, and if you bought the notion that relationships is kind of where I want to spend my time, then the next thing is, all right, let's now start to boil that down because the devil's in the details, right? So what we now want to do is we want to define the key sales values that we believe will actually yield that cultural intent about relationships. And look at, I'm going to give you my experience, okay, in terms of what the stuff that worked for me, right? It's not to say that it's a prescription, it's just a statement that this stuff actually works. So I would look at things like, all right, let's talk about the criteria for success here. So behind this relationship piece is a criteria that I landed on that says, I want to ask the question, how many clients did you dazzle? Did you amaze? Did you blow away? Versus how many sales did you close? I don't want to talk about the sales closure thing. I'll learn about that when I read report. But what I really want as a leading indicator is how many clients did you blow away today, right? So it's in a way, we got to change the language from salesies to clientese, right? From closing to dazzling, etc. Once you have that mindset, then there's a number of potential sales values you can land on. Okay, I'll just give you an example. This is not in any order, but it's the stuff that I spend a lot of time on. One, and I'll talk later about what does a value statement look like, just to give people a sense. But one aspect of it could be, all right, we're going to focus on wowing, not satisfying. Satisfying isn't good enough because satisfied people aren't loyal. Because if a better offer comes along, they're going to go. So I want to blow them away. And so there's a whole piece there. The other thing for me is you need to be really clear with the organization, and you need to say, this is about relationships, not products. You got to get the kids off the street. You got to have the debate and declare this is what it's about. Because if you don't, I can tell you what's going to happen, right? You're going to get on the slippery slope of incrementalism back to the way it was. And unfortunately, you've wasted a lot of time. Innovation is key. Client relationships are built around the ability of the salesperson to innovate for them. I'm not talking applying boilerplate solutions. I'm talking about customized solutions that reflect their unique needs. And there's a whole innovation piece there. The other thing is, are you dealing in large concepts, or are we dealing with the little things that really matter to people? So I've always said, look, at a value that I want my salespeople to have is you better be paying attention to the little things that matter. Because if you don't, unfortunately, they become huge. And now you got to deal with another value, which I will call recovery, because I'm perfectly willing to accept the fact that we will make mistakes.
Yeah. And I think Roy, to your point there about the little things, and when you're developing relationships and you're focused on the customer, is remembering that it may be an enterprise purchase on behalf of a large organization, but the purchase has been made by people, and the individual people who are making that purchasing decision, they have personal stuff riding on it. So you have to always look at as you say, look at the small things as well as the large things.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that really are comfortable dealing in concepts. The problem with concepts are that the concept doesn't yield anything. Right. It's a notion. It's an intellectual aberration. What happens is, unless that intellectual aberration, and I say aberration because it might or might not work, then that's the key. It has to be translated down into action. Okay, that action is always individual specific, because each and every person that we confront in an organization, as you say, have their own insights, their own biasness, and their own needs and wants. And we better be ready to serve them. And that's the other piece of this thing, is that it's not about selling, it's about serving. And I'll talk later about some of the things that work for me about, hiring, recruiting people, serving professionals and teaching them sales, as opposed to going the other way around. Right. So one other thing that I want to just mention here in terms of potential values for sales is, I'm really intrigued, as you know, because you mentioned my book series, Be Different or Be Dead. Yep. I'm really focused on kind of one of a kind notions. And that's got a huge role to play in sales values, and particularly as it relates to recruitment. I didn't want common salespeople. I didn't want salespeople that looked like everybody else. I wanted salespeople that had some weird, quirky, special characteristic about them that would actually yield more innovation in the field than less. So that recruitment piece in terms of a vehicle to change the sales culture is absolutely huge. I'll talk about that a little bit.
I just think that's a great point. Just to underline again, is there's no point in deciding that this is the culture you're going to have and building it, and then recruiting the completely the wrong people to deliver on that culture, right?
Well, it doesn't work. It's it's like finding the right answer to the wrong problem. I get really super high, hot shot salespeople that hate human beings. And I've run into those too. Oh yeah, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. And so
it's like when you come across those people in customer service and you have to end up asking them, saying, why why do you work in customer service again?
Yeah, wouldn't you rather be taking inventory?
Yeah, exactly. Because the last time I checked, the boxes won't talk back to you.
Yeah, it's funny, man. I'm a magnet for those people. That's my problem. I go to a store and I attract incompetence. They just say, "Here comes Roy. I'm going to go piss him off." That's funny. Weird in some way. Look for weird. I mean, so there's a value piece around that says we're only going to look for special people. We're only going to recruit weirdos. I mean, there's a whole piece there, and it's important because it's the detail. Like everybody knows, that's a silly statement, but it's not really. Okay, it's not really. The intent is look for differences. So that's a huge example of kind of like a value that that the sales culture could seek to exploit if they want.
And also, and if you think about it, Roy, I mean, if you recruit people who are a little bit different, right? Those are the type of, I mean, you're looking for confident people who can really build relationships and understand customer. You know, people who are a little bit different, you know, tend to have developed a certain level of confidence over the years because of their difference, and they celebrate it as opposed to shy away from it. So you're getting somebody who's already very comfortable in putting themselves in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah, and the challenge for the leader, let's say you've got a mosaic of arguably 10 people and they're all different. That's got a huge leadership challenge in terms of how you lead that team and how you target special skill sets of one individual versus another individual. I had the sales director once, just a quick story. His name was Bernie, right? Bernie hated strategic planning sessions because he just hated the process of going through that. He just didn't. His strength was not necessarily in helping creating the plan, but once he understood the plan and he knew which hill to take, he took the hill and did not leave any survivors. All right. He just took the hill. So with Bernie, I mean, that was his specialty. He was an execution artist is what he was. And just anytime I had a problem, Bernie, not that, but not that hill, but that hill. I want that hill. Go get it. He says, when do you want it? I says, now. He says, okay, excuse me. I got to go do something. He was off and he did it.
And I think just to underline, because you've hit on an incredibly important point for everyone there. Sometimes we fall into this crazy trap of where we look at people and we go, yeah, I know Roy's good at this, but he's terrible at this. So I need to work on that with him, right? Instead of going, Roy's terrible at that. He's never going to be good at that. It'd be best, maybe he's going to be mediocre at it. Why don't I just focus him on what he's good at? And work around that and fill in put the right people in the right places, right?
You're absolutely right. And that's because it's easy. And the thing that I go after here is that the pundits, the academics, and the experts promulgate that philosophy that says we're going to treat everybody the same. Well, how stupid is that? Marketing is a function of differentiation and discrimination, for God's sakes. That's how successful marketers reach their success. So it's about figuring out what's different and then exploiting that difference. Mass markets, by the way, this is a subject for another chat, but it'll be marketing chats. Mass marketers are insane because they actually believe the average customer exists, and
right.
They don't. They simply don't exist.
So what are some of the things, right? As we said, how we lay this out, and some of the leading indicators that you can see about that this is taking place, and then how do you ensure that whatever culture, how do you ensure that it endures? Because one of the things that you find often is we get very excited about initiative, we get very excited about this, and we go off at 100 miles an hour, and then we slow a little, and before you know it, it's kind of faded, and it becomes like, oh, that was initiative du jour that we had. I'm sure there'll be another one around the corner. How do you ensure that these things really embed and take on a life of their own, become self-sustaining?
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. If left unto itself, it will take the way of the dodo bird for sure. And so it's really, this is a challenge for sales leadership. It really is. And if sales leaders can't step up to doing certain things, the change towards away from a product-centric world to a client-centric world, even though a lot of people say they're still there, they're not. All you got to do is look at what they do. They flog products. It'll never happen. So when I look at what the key objectives and priorities should be of leadership, it sort of starts out with saying, look, sales leaders have got to create the environment within which a high-performing culture can be created. Okay, so they are the true climatologists, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this sense, right? And so they need to decide, and they need to figure out at the value level, if you accept the fact that the purpose is growth, right?
Sure.
The intent is relationships. Now we got to break that down into values. The leader is got to be really, really on top of working with their team to create, in essence, the key values that are going to be required to actually live the strategic intent or the cultural intent. And so there's a number, and just to give you some examples of some of the crazy statements that I used to work with various sales teams, and these would be examples of value statements, okay? One would be, we have the courage to innovate. So and courage is a really important word. You got to step up. You can't say, well, what are the problems? Not interested. You got to step up. Secondly, another statement could be, we believe, this is a bit wordy, but whatever. We believe in dazzling the client, and all of our actions are aimed at this result.
Right.
Right.
Well, I tell you what I like about that. I actually don't think it's too wordy, whatever. What I like about that is there's a clear yardstick there. Okay. You're saying, we're going to dazzle the customer. If you're doing something during your day and you can't find a connection between that and dazzling the customer, then you can ask yourself, why am I doing it? Then you can ask your manager, why am I doing this? This doesn't seem to be this doesn't seem to have dazzling the customer as the end result.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you the beginning to create a reward system. And that's going to be another point I'm going to just make in a sec. Just let me just sort of fire some other example value statements at you. We develop deep, intimate relationship with people inside and outside. So if you're not building intimate relationships with your colleagues, I'd be willing to bet you can't do it with a client. And it's because it's an intrinsic, innate thing. Okay, you don't learn this. In many respects, it's recruiting the basic innate competency of a person to like humans, want to be close to them, and develop relationships with them, right? We will always act in favor of the client. That's a statement about what's important, the inside and serving bureaucracy or the outside serving clients. We believe in.
And by the way, Roy, on that one, that doesn't mean that that one will always, what was it, act on behalf of the client, or?
We will always act in favor of the client. That's not to say giving away the shop, no.
Yeah, and that doesn't always mean that you're saying yes to them, because sometimes you may have to say no to them for their own good, right? And you may have to advise them. You may have to, because sometimes people make that mistake and they think being customer focused, customer centric just means saying yes to everything the customer asks you for.
Well, those are people that do not have a good relationship with the customer. Because if you have a good relationship with the customer, no, or have you considered this, simply become part of the engagement process.
Yeah.
Nothing to be feared. The people that fear saying no are product floggers, and they should fear saying no. Did I say that with my outside voice? Okay. The other thing here is, and this is really important because I use this extensively, and it's a statement that says, if we fail, and we will, recovery will be our number one priority. What this says is, and it's particularly relevant in a sales environment where there's such a high degree of dependence on others in the organization who screw up, and who has to live with it? The salesperson who owns a relationship with the client. So the ability to be able to apologize, fix it fast, and do something that surprises the client, and by the way, that's the definition of recovery, is exceedingly important. We built a recovery strategy in our sales plan. And at first, my colleagues on the executive floor said, what are you doing? I said, hey, do you really think we're not going to make mistakes? Oh yeah, okay, we will. Do you believe that recovery drives customer loyalty? Because there's tons of studies around that show that. Yes, it does. Then don't you think we should have a strategy for it? I can't find it anywhere else. So for those guys listening here, guys generic, get yourself a recovery strategy, get yourself a recovery value, because it's exceedingly important terms of how you create relationship. So those are just some examples of some value statements. Leaders need to do 3 or 4 more things, right? First of all, they need to bake that into the reward and compensation plan. Otherwise, it will not get done. So we're talking earlier about preventing the slippery slope back to what was important yesterday. If salespeople don't have these values in the reward system, we know salespeople, we know that they're driven by that. It'll never happen.
Sure. Absolutely.
And you need to build customer metrics. Customer perception data and objectives must be part of the sales compensation plan. Now, when I tried to do this, all hell broke loose. Of course, salespeople were running for their caves, oh, that's not my job. And well, okay, self-selecting, there you go. So that's really important. The other thing is a sales leader must, what I would call, cleanse the sales environment of non-believers. Okay. You cannot do what we're talking about here with people that really think that you're crazy and that they should be doing the sales function as prescribed by Sales 101. You can't do that. You have to exit people who are not willing to go with you on the journey. What I did is I got a whole bunch of them. I made it real easy for them to leave. And I recruited people with a strong serving ethic, and I taught them how to sell. Can't do it the other way around. And so the exit process is exceedingly important. So there's some examples of what leaders need to do to kind of make this thing.
And I think on that last point, Roy, is that sometimes that's one that people shy away from. But the reality is that you're not doing yourself, the organization, and the individual any favors by keeping them somewhere where they're not going to be successful. They don't fit the culture. They're not going to be able to do or willing to do the things that you need. So help them on their way to their next success.
Exactly. And I just a practical example, back in my days in the telecom business, we had a whole lot of salespeople who were order takers when we were a monopoly. Once we went to a competitive world, particularly the data world, that skill was no longer relevant. Okay, they were delighted to get a package.
Yeah, sure.
All right. And so what we ended up doing is recruiting people to a different value set in sales, basically built around the sort of things we've been discussing today.
Yeah. As we say back in Ireland, horses for courses. You've got to pick the right horse for the right race course.
Yeah, exactly right.
And the conditions. All right. Well, we're bumping up against the end of our time here, Roy. But before we go, we always like to ask our guests to share one of their power tips. So something that you personally do, Roy, to set yourself up for success every day.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I've always had this kind of like be different mantra. I've always tried to look for ways to do things differently. I've always approached things which have been described to me as being in a contrarian or controversial mode. And I accept
Really?
I accept the plot.
I find that very hard to believe, Roy.
I accept the credits, right? I do. The compliment is really, really gratifying. So for me, every day I try, and I got to tell you, I'm not always successful in this, but I'm always trying to look at life through this be different lens, right? And that really says, how can I either do something different, or how can I spin whatever I'm doing and spin in a positive way, in a different way to kind of do things. And I practice that with my family. Like, for example, I set up a troll club with my grandkids. So my ancestry is Norwegian. So we have a troll club, and I'm the president. So who the heck would set up a troll club with their grandkids? I did.
Wow, that's fantastic. I love it, Roy. That's fantastic. You troll. How do you get into your troll club, or is that, a closed membership?
No, you got to apply.
You gotta. Well, listen, this has been fantastic. Martha, how's the Twitter chat been active today?
Yeah, great. So some very nice advices. So sorry, I was thinking I was unmuted. But okay. Yeah, everything fine. Great.
Excellent. Yes. So listen, Roy, this has been fantastic. Roy Osing. Before you go, Roy, how can people find out a little bit more about you and your books and the work you do? Everything is on SalesPop, obviously, but Roy, if you want to give out any.
Well, I think the basic place would be join me on my website at bedifferentorbedead.com. My email address is in there. I'm using gmail.com. I'd be delighted to engage with anybody who's got questions and share experiences with us. I blog every week. So if you'd like to subscribe for my blog to get more of this silly stuff, come on in, be fun. And yeah, I'd love to engage with everybody that is looking for ways to step out and not step in.
Yeah, I love it. I love it, Roy.
Nice.
And you know, Roy had a fantastically successful career, and you can tell that because he spends half his time now going on luxury vacations around the world. And he said, "I want to be Roy when I grow up." All right, my name is John. Yeah, John Golden, Sales Pop Online Sales Magazine, Pipeline of CRM. Thank you for joining us for the Sales Chat. We'll see you for another one soon, and live on YouTube for the first time. So that's really exciting. All right, bye now.
Bye-bye.